Hey, this is Mr. Griffin, and welcome to another edition of Random Thoughts. As you can see here with this animated background I got going, you see Chris Rock superimposed in front of the Oscar statue. And of course, tonight is the Oscars, which I will not be watching, even without a boycott, because I'm already in bed by the time that's on. Plus, I have no interest in it. That being said, everyone's been making a big deal about hashtag Oscars so white, which, quite frankly, is true. But I've also said that the Oscars were never really, I've said this in other videos, were never really designed for minorities, particularly African Americans. Sure, they'll let a Jamie Foxx or a Denzel Washington or a Halle Berry win here and there, but really they were never really meant for us, in all honesty. But that's not really what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is everyone's making a big deal about Chris Rock should have boycotted. Here's my thing. And you have to think logically here. Yes, it would have made a bit of a it would have made a big statement if Chris Rock would have boycotted the Oscars. But from a business logical standpoint, it wouldn't have been very smart. And let me explain why. Number one, I'm sure Chris Rock hosting the Oscars is a lot of big money for him. Number one. Number two, I'm pretty certain them people didn't get him to agree to host the Oscars without signing some sort of contract or binding deal. Number three, if he walks off of the Oscars, unless there was some extreme breach of contract or extreme moral breach of contract, and I'm pretty sure the fact that there's hardly no black people in it is not among that, he can get sued, folks. And for those that want to say Chris Rock is a coon or an Uncle Tom for not, or Uncle Ruckus, I'm trying to get away from saying Uncle Tom, Uncle Ruckus for not boycotting the Oscars, I say this. Are you going to compensate this man for the money that he'll lose? Are you going to compensate this man when whoever runs the Oscars, which is probably a bunch of old Jewish white men, take his ass to court and sue him? What are you going to do to compensate? You know, people that want to run to Chris Rock and say, well, you should boycott, you're probably going to do nothing to compensate this man financially. This man has kids to think about. I think he's still going through his divorce with his longtime wife, Malik Compton Rock, which on my old channel, Mr. Griff F, I actually talked about, where he was allegedly having an affair with fellow actor Rosario Dawson. You guys that are saying he should boycott, it's one, y'all not going to do anything to compensate him. And this is, if I was in Chris Rock's shoes, that's what I would say to the people that were coming up to me. I'd be like, okay, I'll boycott, but what are you going to do for me to compensate? Oh, well, standing up for your people, that should be enough compensation. I'm like, no. Morally, yes. But financially, that doesn't pay my bills. That doesn't take care of my kids. That doesn't help me with my pending divorce. Standing up for morality doesn't put food on mine and my children's table. Doesn't put clothes on their back. What are you going to do to compensate me? And if they couldn't give me nothing solid, I'd be like, well, even though I agree with you morally, I'm still doing the Oscars. Because standing up for morality isn't putting nothing in my bank account and isn't going to keep me from getting sued. You see, sometimes I think black folks don't think about stuff like that. You see, when Rosalind Sanchez chose to walk out on Miss Universe or whatever that pageant was after Donald Trump made his comments last summer, I'm pretty sure she had not only there was a breach of morality contract, which probably included hostile work environment, which legally that's a valid reason. And the fact that Trump owned this pageant at the time, she's probably argued, look, he said some offensive things about Latinos. I feel that's going to create a hostile work environment. So I'm not judging that pageant, as well as for moral reasons. And that's a valid reason. The fact that there was a lack of black people at the Oscars, while morally it's disgusting, legally that's not a valid reason not to do it. And if you're going to do stuff like that, that's why I advocate for, if we're going to do stuff like that, we need to get our money together to help compensate somebody like Chris Rock, who is already in a legally binding contract. We're not doing that. We just expect him to just up and boycott, and he's not. And morally, perhaps he's wrong, but financially, legally, I cannot fault him for not doing it. And we're just gonna sit here, call him names and stuff, but are we gonna give him any money? And when I say we, I mean black people as a whole, but especially those that actually have money that are calling for him to do that. Even the Smiths aren't calling for him to do that, and they've already said they boycott. Although their reasons for boycotting is suspect. And I was talking to a sister yesterday. I was giving her a ride to her family's house, her and her son, and we was talking about the Oscar situation, and she pretty much agreed with me. She was like, morally, Chris Rock would be doing the right thing by boycotting the Oscars. But from a financial standpoint, he would be dumb, because I'm pretty sure there's a legal contract somewhere. And what's funny is most black people want to take this big stand, but they're not going to do anything to compensate him. Give you an example. Muhammad Ali. He chose to stand up for what he believed in back when he wouldn't take the gun and go to Vietnam. He chose to stand on his religious beliefs. And black people were all cheering and clapping for him, but from a financial standpoint, he suffered big time. For 3.5 years, he lost his right to fight. And for 3.5 years, him and his growing family at the time, with Khalid Belinda Ali, his wife at the time, and I think they had like maybe 2 or 3 kids at that point, not counting the ones that while he was messing around, that he had, not counting them. Muhammad suffered big time for his stance. And black people, I gotta be honest, black people did very little, except for maybe close friends and maybe some family. Black people did very little to compensate him. The Nation of Islam did next to nothing. The Nation of Islam of that era did next to nothing. Once he lost the heavyweight championship, they basically had no use for him. They did very little to help him. The only reason he had money on the table was close friends, family, and the lecture circuit where he would make speeches. He made some money off of that. But other than that, he struggled. Him and his family struggled for 3.5 years. And black people, even of that era, and that's when black people was more united than we are now. Black people of that era did very little to help Muhammad Ali. And as I said, black people in that era were way more united than they are now. So in the era where they were way more united, they did very little to help Muhammad Ali when he was in dire straits. What do you think the ones of today would do for Chris Rock? Very little to nothing. So no, I don't fault Chris Rock for not boycotting the Oscars at all. I will not be watching personally, even without the hashtag Oscars so white, because I have very little to no interest in any of the award shows. Honestly. Because award shows have not been that good or entertaining. The mainstream nor the ones that are supposed to be aimed at black people. They have not really been that good in the last 20 years or so. So I have had very little interest. And the ones that do watch say, ooh, it's so good. I mean, them motherfuckers will be entertained by anything. They'll be entertained by a brother taking a shit in the middle of the road, okay? They're entertained by anything. Back when I was growing up, the award shows like American Music and the Black award shows, they actually were entertaining. Although some of them are slowly starting to realize that and get back to it, and now putting out a little more quality stuff, not any type of junk. Or like, I didn't even watch the tribute to Michael Jackson right after he died, because there was the only part I did kind of peep was the New Edition tribute. The New Edition tribute but like Lil Wayne and all that, I mean, the man just died and they still doing their same old shtick, doing all the cussing and everything. I mean, and I know I throw some bad language too, but there are times when it's not appropriate. And I don't want to get off on some other tangent or ramble or nothing, but there's times it's not I was like, I turned that garbage off. The only parts that I peeped was the New Edition tribute and the tribute from Chris Brown. And this is when Chris Brown, this was not long after the whole thing with Rihanna. He was still pretty much a pariah. And some of the mainstream was trying to dig at him and say, oh, he was being fake. No, I looked at that performance. That brother was genuine. I believe he was genuinely heartbroken. And that tribute to Michael Jackson, he really meant it. He was genuinely heartbroken. Because, it's hard to fake tears like that. It's really hard to fake tears like that. But that's a whole nother subject. Back to Chris Rock. I don't fault him for fulfilling his obligation to the Oscars. Because if we, as black people, are going to tell a man like Chris Rock, boycott the Oscars, because he probably really feels the same way. Oscars so he probably thinks the same way. In fact, I guarantee, just based on some of his stand-ups over the years and some of the things he said, I would say he probably feels the same way. But he's doing it out of financial obligation and contractual obligation. If we as a people are going to tell him to boycott, we as people need to compensate him, particularly ones on his level or higher. They'd be like, hey, you boycott these Oscars, man. We'll take care of you. And get something in writing, too. Guaranteed that he will be compensated and taken care of when they come after his ass and sue him. Well, really, for those that want to watch the Oscars, I hope you enjoy it. Me, personally, I won't be watching. But anyway, that's all I got to say on this. I'm out. I'm Mr. Griffin.